So I want to start by asking a fairly simple question. Has more data that we have in huge amounts around the world led to better decisions, and has that led to improved democracy? I think the answer most people would give is it's highly questionable. And the question I have for this talk is why, and how can we improve that situation? Does anyone remember before the web? It's sort of hard to do, right? It's been a huge change, and many of us existed before the web, but it's sort of hard to remember the information deficit that now seems to have existed. You would look stuff up in books. Now we've got this massive overload. Most people believe they're bombarded by data and information in all sorts of ways, and we ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get a much bigger problem. We're going to see data coming from the Internet of Things, coming from us personally as we track all our health. This is a much bigger problem emerging, so we're going to be swimming even further in data. So one of our problems as a society right now is, how do we take that available data and information and make it accessible? Actually accessible to real citizens on the ground. And the other problem, which is related to that, is how do we take averaged expertise, averaged interpretation of that, and make it personalized to what we actually want and need ourselves? So I think one piece of this answer is computation for everyone. And by that I mean the ability that we give citizens through automation and their own education to be able to analyze data themselves on the ground and to be able to put this picture together and get answers to questions they actually want. Not generalized questions, but their actual answers. One of the problems with this right now is the way the data is. So most people assume you just push data out, and it's been great to see the open data initiatives in the UK and elsewhere gain pace as people believe the data should be theirs to look at, particularly governmental data. But the problem we've got is open is not necessarily accessible. And what we really need is data for citizen computation. So actually being able to human interact with the data directly, isn't that useful when you've got huge amounts of it? What you need is you need to be able to get the automation of your computer that we all have to be able to help you answer those questions, to be your research assistant. And in a sense, computation is the way you can potentially get between those two. In a sense, what I'm saying is, as a consumer of knowledge, you should be generating knowledge. You want to generate your own knowledge that works for you. And what's interesting is this is a trend about sort of expertise getting personal that's been going on for quite a few years now, since really computers got established. So, you know, most people type for themselves right now. They don't get an expert to do it for them. We all do charts and put things out like that. The web really was two things. It was finding facts ourselves, but it was also personal distribution of information. And then you can look at things like digital photography. I think it's the turn now of knowledge. Generating knowledge, being experts, each of us, or being able to replace the traditional experts by having enough expertise with us ourselves to be able to do that. So let me try and show you what I mean. One way of accessing knowledge of the sort I'm talking about is to do something like, let's ask for something we might be interested in, nuclear power versus, let's say, wind power, if I can type, versus coal power in the UK. And what we might do is go off and ask that query, and we want that query calculated for what we actually asked. And so here it's come back, it's interpreted the question, it's tried to compute from data it's got, and it's come back with some kind of interesting charts here. For example, if you look at the coal chart, there was a dip in the mid-80s, which I assume was the coal miners' strike. And actually, coal's gone down quite a long way, and wind is just starting to come up. But perhaps more interesting is here, it's also suggested that maybe we meant electricity from fossil fuels in general, and not just from coal. And then you see, of course, we're still using a lot of fossil fuels up here. So that's a typical kind of linguistic query. We've got an answer. You could have got it from the data, but it's not so easy. You can do more personal things, like ask things like, am I drunk, for example, a good sort of linguistic query. And you know, then you might change your body weight. Unfortunately, I rather underestimated my body weight, but you can get computations of that sort. So that's a more personalized style of that. Well, you can't only do linguistics these days. You can do voice linguistics. So let me try and demo this. How long will I live in the UK versus the US? And there we go. There's an answer to that exact question. So I live a bit longer in the UK than the US, about 80.5 years on average, and that's how it's gone up over the years. So it's pretty easy, if you use computation, That's one kind of interface you can imagine for getting answers from data. Let's talk about another. So another is what I would call a more narrative interface, maybe a knowledge app. And the idea here is you're reading something, you're being led through a possible way of looking at stuff, but you, the reader, can drive as well. So in this case, we've got a chart of if you invested under the Tories and under Labour and took your investments out under the Alternative Party, how well would you do, depending on when you invested and depending on how long you think policy decisions take to take effect. So if you think policy decisions just have an instant effect on investments, then that would be the chart. But if you start pulling it and changing it, you can see how it can rather change if you think, let's say it takes 7 or 8 years for policy decisions to take effect. So that gives you back some power as a citizen to really look into the data and ask questions about it. So a key question when you think about data is, what's the interface? What's the workflow? Too often we throw data out and we think, well, somebody will figure out how to use this. It's too complicated. So what you need to always tether this to is, what's the interface that I would actually like to use to get to this data? Because if you can't do that, the chances are most people won't be able to hack it. But whatever the interface, a key thing always is the value of sort of things that are ready for the computer to compute from is always much greater than dead information. Think of satellite navigation and maps. Very valuable to have a thing actually computable and ready to go from. So one thing to think about is, who has the knowledge assets that we can sort of make computable, that will really help us to get information from? And in a sense, these are assets that can be made much more valuable by making them computable. Well, companies have huge amounts of knowledge assets, though often they're private to them. Whether that's right or wrong in different cases is a matter of discussion. They're also publicly funded entities. In the UK, of course, the BBC has huge amounts of knowledge. And increasingly our own. When we go with all the trackers I talked about earlier, that knowledge needs to be ready to use, not just hidden away somewhere, at least for ourselves. But I really want to focus on sort of knowledge assets that governments have. Because I think governments have knowledge that should be available to us all and should be accessible to us all. And there's a lot of it. And the question is, what can governments do, and which areas does it really hit to improve that and make it computational? The biggest example of a gain I think one could have worldwide is health. Health has fantastic amounts of data, which we are just throwing in the trash right now. And we'll have much more when we're collecting all of our data on ourselves. Just imagine where everybody in this room and beyond is tracking all of their things, blood pressure, heart rate, all of these things. I should be tracking my heart rate now, and seeing how these relate to everybody else's as well. If you imagine putting that all together, there's fantastic data on how we can improve outcomes, do algorithmic treatments, and so forth. So both system-wide and personally, we can make huge efficiency and effectiveness improvements by making data computable, making it so we can really ask these questions. Social security, economic assessment, things like statistics offices, Office of National Statistics in the UK, education and transport. These are all areas where, and particularly meshing between these areas, makes a huge difference. Now, I've been talking all the way through about how the machine needs to get so much better at helping us, the human, to be able to deal with data. In a sense, it needs to automate a lot of this process. So people accuse me sometimes of being highly contradictory with a previous TED talk I gave about reforming maths education fundamentally by saying we need to totally change our education. But I'm going to explain why it's a paradox and not a contradiction. The thing is, as you put more machinery on things, you need to go to the next level up. And so once we can do all these things with the computer, once we can analyze data, you then need to know how to go the next level up and ask the right sorts of questions. And I think maths is at the center of this. Maths is a much bigger subject than calculating. And it really is the sort of underlying subject for knowing how to analyze the world. And really, it's got 4 steps. You define questions, you're abstracting to this sort of mathematical layer, you're computing answers, which now usually is done with a computer, and you're interpreting the results, going back the other way. And the problem with education right now in maths is we're essentially spending all the time doing step 3 by hand. What we should be doing is spending far more time getting people to understand how to look at particularly data and other aspects of maths and use a computer for step 3. And that's a fundamental change that is gaining ground, I think, around the world. So I'm arguing for what I would call a computational knowledge economy. So this is, in a sense, something that is a step up from the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy was sort of something fashioned where the majority of, so to speak, the revenue in a country was generated by people doing things with their brains rather than with their hands. I'm arguing we need to go to the next level up. Just knowing raw information isn't really good enough. What you need to do is know how to apply the machinery we have to work at the next level up with that information. I guess the key point always is, work a level up from the machines, don't compete with them. Competing with machines that are successful never works in the end, and that's true through agriculture, and it's going to be true now through knowledge. And when we think about maths, what maths really is a system of analyzing and of life. So by being good at the kind of mathematics I'm talking about, you can be good at understanding how to take the data we've got and the knowledge we've got and ask the right questions and work out the right results from it. Now, how does coding relate to this? Coding has become fashionable recently. How does it relate to this? Well, I think coding is a vital way to write down what you think about technical ideas. And it's sort of a way to express it. And because I kind of like living dangerously, I thought I would try and write you a piece of code here. And this has all sorts of possible issues with it, but let me do my best to get around them. So what I would like to do, I thought you'd be pretty bored of seeing me by this stage in the talk. So what I'd like to do is set it up so that I'm blocked out. I'm image processed to be blocked out of this video. So let me try and do this. So what I'm going to do is I want to say blocked me, and I want to show me, and I also want to show the graphics of a rectangle, which is going to be applied over where it finds my face. So I'm doing all sorts of mathematics and stuff here, and the faces of me, and let's see, so, everything's sort of working through. There we go. I got blocked out, and I hope you appreciate that for what it is. Now, I was going to go one step further, and this is a fairly high-wire act. So under here, I've written a little piece of code, which I hope when I hit the button will tweet this image on the Twitter stream. And hopefully, if all goes well, we'll manage to tweet that, and you should see it on my at Conrad Wolfram tweet stream in just a moment. So in a sense, that's building an app and trying to tweet the result all in a couple of minutes or something. And it's nice to be able to do that in real time. So I wanted to come back to the theme at the beginning about decisions. One quick key question I always think when I'm making a decision is it instinct or is it analysis? And people I've watched tend to naturally go from one end to the other. I think it's this, and perhaps if they're good, they go and check it by analysis, or they go the other way. Basically, I think it should be both. But if you look at the eras of sort of management and democracy, it's gone from very instinctual. We didn't have much data to work off, so you just kind of have to go off instinct, to this sort of simple targets, where the idea is you kind of, pick a number. It's sort of easy to compute certain numbers, so you'll pick those and look at those, and that's what everything's hung off. They sort of assume an importance beyond their ability to judge. To what I think we should be going to is what I call agile targets, where, in a sense, people are publishing out this computable data, and it's for you, the citizen, or you, the manager, to figure out what to ask about that data, to pick your own metric, to ascertain whether you believe the thing's been done well or not done well, or how it could be improved. And so same with democracy. You could argue it's sort of gone from brand to simple message. These are all juxtaposition too. But we need to go more to self-evaluation and to give people the power to do that. And I think that's what some of this technology enables. So if one was in government, what would one do to make what I call the first computable country? A country where all the data is just ready there for people to either linguistically or interactively work with. Well, I would say there are about 3 obvious steps. One is sort of to add a computability layer to government data. So that means it's a bit like tarmacking a road. You can build the road. The question is, how much do you kind of layer it? A road without tarmac, hoping everyone will sort of tarmac it, is probably not going to work that well. It's better to spend a little bit extra to put the tarmac on, and it's much, much more useful. And I feel like we've got data right now without the tarmac, so to speak. So that's a key thing, and particularly all organizations do this, but particularly government is in a position to be able to do this. The other thing I think is there are lots of industries which require reporting. Finance, particularly in the center stage, I would say at the moment. Energy. We should make sure those require computable reporting. So we and regulators can really look into those things in many different ways, not just fix on a few metrics. And of course, make maths education computer-based. That's crucial so that we are all able to interact with this. Well, finally, I thought, we just can't stop making everything computable. So we've got a computable candidate here. And the idea is he can sort of change his position depending on what he computes is a good position to be in for his electorate. And so the question is, with all these policies I was talking about, will TED here get your vote as he changes character? And so, one sort of character could be a candidate called Ed. Would you put a cross next to Ed? Or it could be another one, would you put a cross next to Dave? Or would you vote for these sorts of policies and put a cross next to TED and turn him into TEDx? Thank you very much.